Hi and welcome. I'm Julieanne Cost. In this video, we're going to create this composite using both new and traditional techniques in Photoshop. I'll start by creating a new document in Photoshop that's the size I want my final image to be. In this example, it'll be 20 by 20 inches at 300 pixels per inch in 16-bit and in Adobe RGB. Next, let's add some photos. I put them in a collection in Lightroom Classic so that I can quickly select them and then choose Photo, Edit In, Open as Smart Object Layers in Photoshop. I open the files as smart objects for two reasons. First, Lightroom will hand off a copy of the original RAW file to Photoshop with the adjustments, and if I need to make additional adjustments to the image while compositing, like changing color or tone, I can do so by editing the contents of the smart object in Camera Raw, maintaining the highest quality edits possible. And second, I can resize and transform the smart objects as many times as needed without losing quality. We see that all the photos are in a single document in Photoshop. I'll choose Window, Arrange, and then Tile to view both open documents. Using the Layers panel, I'll select all of the layers and then drag and drop them into the 20 by 20 inch document. Then I'll close the image that we no longer need without saving changes. I want to reverse the stacking order of the added layers so that the sky is at the bottom and the paper is at the top. So with all of the layers still selected, I'll choose Layer, Arrange, and Reverse. Then I'll target the sky layer to select it and hold Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and click the eye icon to hide the visibility of all of the layers except for the sky. To resize the sky, we can select the Move tool by tapping the V key. Then we can choose to show transform controls to resize the sky. But I find it distracting to always have the controls showing, so I'll disable that. We could also choose Edit, and then Free Transform. We could use the keyboard shortcut, or choose Transform and then select from the list of transformations. But if you have the contextual taskbar showing, it's probably easiest to just click the transform icon. All right, let's drag to transform the sky to fit the width of the canvas, and then reposition it. I'll choose Done to apply the transformation. Next, let's view the ice layer and target it in the Layers panel. Again, I'll click on the transform icon, and then reposition and resize the layer. I'll hold the Shift key to temporarily disable proportional scaling to change the height of the photo, but not the width. Then I'll click Done. Now to blend the sky with the ice layer, I'll add a layer mask by clicking the icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Then I'll set my default colors to white and black by tapping the D key. Then I'll tap the G key to select the Gradient tool. If I right-click on the tool icon in the options bar, I can quickly reset it to its default. Then I'll drag a short gradient in a layer mask to slowly fade the top horizon of the ice photo. We can use the on-screen transformation controls to adjust the gradient as needed. And looking at the mask in the Layers panel, we see that where the mask is black, it hides the information on the layer, and where it's white, we can see the information. Now, typically, I don't worry about trying to harmonize colors or tones this early in the process, but to demonstrate the power of opening RAW files as smart objects, I'll double-click on the thumbnail for the sky photo in the Layers panel to have Photoshop open the contents of the smart object into Camera Raw, where we can access all of the same non-destructive editing technology as we have in Lightroom's Develop module. Let's make the sky blue instead of pink using the temperature and tint controls. If I had opened this image as a regular layer, we're apt to see banding when changing colors like this. Great, let's apply that. Next, I'll target and make visible the hot spring. I'll click the transformation icon, and again we can resize the layer as well as reposition it. I like to add elements to the scene that appear natural, but in reality most likely couldn't actually coexist. I'll hold the Shift key to make it appear to match the perspective of the ice, and then click Done. To select the hot spring, I'll select the Object Selection tool And with the rectangle option selected, I'm going to drag a rectangle around the hot spring. When I release the cursor, Photoshop finds the object, in this case the hot spring, within the rectangle and selects it. Then I can add a layer mask using the contextual taskbar to create a mask that displays the selected area and hides everything outside of the selection. If needed, we can target the layer mask in the Layers panel and use the nondestructive feather slider on the Properties panel to soften the edge. Next, I'll target and make visible the layer of steam. Again, I'll click the transformation icon and reposition and resize the layer, holding the Shift key so that it's the same size as the canvas. And this time, I'll just tap Return or Enter to apply the transformation. On the Layers panel, I'll set the blend mode to soft light, and I'll decrease the opacity to 30%. Moving back to the ice layer, I'll also decrease its opacity to 30%, making it less visible. But then we see all of the blue from the sky layer below. So let's target that layer and add a layer mask. And again, I'll tap G to select the gradient tool. And this time I'll drag a linear gradient from the horizon downwards into the ice. Then I'll select all of these layers and drag them to the folder icon in order to place them in a group. Double-clicking on the group's name, I'll rename it Environment. Now that I have the environment created, before I add the primary subject, to save time, I'm going to jump to another version of this composite that has all of the rest of the elements that I want to add already resized and repositioned in the canvas so that you don't have to sit and watch me transform layers over and over again. All right, let's target the layer with a figure and make it visible. If I choose Photoshop, Settings, Image Processing, on Windows this would be under the Edit menu and then Preferences, we can see that I have Select Subject and Remove Background set to use the cloud for processing. We can use Device if we don't have internet connectivity, but the resulting selection or mask may not be as high a quality when using the cloud. From the contextual taskbar, I'll choose to remove background. Photoshop automatically selects the subject, inverts the selection, and adds a layer mask to hide everything outside of the selection. To hide the head, we could use the Object Selection tool with a rectangle option like we did before, or we can click on Select People, choose the desired person, and then choose the options that will select the head. And when we have everything we need, we can click Apply. Using the contextual taskbar, I'll click on the paint can and choose to fill that area on the mask with black. When I deselect, we see a bit of a halo around the edges that Photoshop left behind, but I can quickly tap the B key to select the brush tool, and then paint with black in the mask to hide those edges. Then to make the figure appear to be in the water, I'll get a little bit larger of a brush by tapping the right bracket key, and then paint out the feet and legs. To create a shadow, I'll use the Selection Brush tool and paint in the area that I want the shadow. Then from the bottom of the Layers panel, I'll add a Curves Adjustment layer. Photoshop converts the selection into a mask so that when I drag down on the curve, only the selected area is darkened. But the edge of the selection is too sharp, so I'll click on the mask icon in the Properties panel and add a non-destructive feather to soften it. I'll also change the stacking order of the adjustment layer so that it's below the figure, and I'll tap the V key to select the Move tool, and we can reposition it as needed. Now to add the dog's head. Unfortunately, I only have this old photo, and if I target the layer and then choose Remove Background, and we zoom in, we can see that because the photo was shot on film, it has quite a different look and feel to the photograph taken with a modern digital camera, especially when compared to the sharpness of the jacket. So to create a higher quality image of the dog, while trying to keep the face as similar as possible, I'll switch from Photoshop to firefly.adobe.com because there are more generative models currently available for me to experiment with Firefly. Depending on when you're watching this video, this page might look a bit different, as Adobe's always updating and adding new features to Firefly. For now, I'll choose Generate, then Generate Image. Here we can select a model. I'll choose Gemini 3 with Nano Banana Pro, set the aspect ratio to tall or 2:3, and choose a reference image from my device, and I'll navigate to the photo of the dog. Then I'll paste in the prompt: a photograph of an adult yellow Labrador looking directly at the camera with graying whiskers against a gray background, f/22, no blur, simple, beautiful, deep focus, small aperture, and no shallow depth of field. Then I'll choose Generate. Now these models are rapidly evolving. When I first started creating this composite, it was actually Flux Context Pro that gave me the best results. So I highly encourage you to experiment with the different models. I like this rendering, and because I used the photo of my dog as the reference image, it's very similar to the original, but it has that more modern look and feel of being photographed with a digital camera. It also has a bit greater depth of field. To download the image, I'll scroll up and click the download button. This will place it in my downloads folder. In Photoshop, I can then select File, Place Embedded, navigate to the image, and then place it into my document as a smart object. I'll go ahead and zoom out using Command 0 on Mac, Control 0 on Windows, so that I can transform it non-destructively. Next, let's delete the other layer of the dog just to avoid confusion. I'll choose Remove Background to isolate the dog from the background. And then let's zoom in and just reposition it a bit. I need to hide a little bit more of the dog, but I don't want to ruin the mask created by the Remove Background command, just in case I make a mistake. So I'll drag the layer to the group icon in order to place it within a group, and then add a second mask on the group. I'll decrease the opacity for the layer so that I can see the jacket below, and I think I need to reposition the dog just a wee bit more. Then I'll use the selection brush to select this area so that we can blend the dog's fur with the jacket. Then we can use the paint bucket to fill that area with black and then deselect. All right, let's set the opacity back to 100% for the layer group. I think the dog's a bit too dark, so I'll add a curves adjustment layer and lighten the shadows. Now, if the highlights are too light, we can add another point on the curve to prevent them from being adjusted. In order to restrict the adjustment so that it only adjusts the dog, I'll click the clipping mask icon at the bottom of the Properties panel. Now, in the past, I would have needed to use a brush and paint little hair-like strokes in the mask in order to make it look like the fur was on top of the jacket. But now, with the selection brush still selected, I'll select the layer group and then paint over the areas where we want the fur to blend with the background and the jacket. I'll choose Generative Fill, select Firefly Fill and Expand Beta, and then choose Generate. You might see different models depending on when you're watching this video and what version of Photoshop you have installed. Now we can view the 3 variations that were generated and select the one that we want to use. We can see in this example that Generative Fill can be really helpful in blending together information from multiple layers onto a single unified resulting layer. Now let's add the wings. I like this image that I have of the heron, so I rotated the image to move the wing roughly into position. With the layer targeted, I'll choose Remove Background in order to isolate the bird. Then I'll use the Selection Brush tool to drag a selection around the rest of the bird that I want to hide. Again, using the paint bucket on the contextual taskbar, I will choose black in order to hide that area. Then I'll select Deselect. Next, I'll Option drag the layer, or Alt drag on Windows, to duplicate it in the Layers panel, and then return to the Transform icon on the contextual taskbar. I'll use the Flip Horizontal option, and then just drag to reposition the wing a bit. I can continue to click Done every time to commit to transformations, or simply move to the next task. When I shift-click to select both of the wings, Photoshop will commit to the transformation automatically. Now, with both layers selected, I'll drag them to the group icon to put them inside a group, and then we can double-click on the name of the group and rename it. Then let's drag the wings group below the figure. I'll tap the V key again. I just need to grab the Move tool to reposition them. But while I liked these wings, I wasn't sure that I liked the shape they were in. So I exported these two layers as a JPEG, and I used them as a reference file in Firefly, just like we did with the dog's head. To save time, I want to show you the results. So when I used the reference image, the wings that the models generated were very similar to the original, which makes sense because the reference file was guiding the shape of the wings. But when I removed the composition reference image, the models were able to introduce more variation. And here are the results of the different Firefly image models without the reference image. Here's Firefly Image 5 Preview, Image 4 Ultra, Image 4, and Image 3. Notice that I use the same prompt for each image. And here are examples of other models also without the reference image, including Flux Contax Pro, Gemini 3 Nano Banana, GPT Image, Ideogram, Imagen, and Runway. In Photoshop, I can now choose File, and then Place Embedded, and select the wings. I'll reposition them, and then commit to the placement. Then I'll choose Remove Background, and then we can delete my original heron wings. Now it's time to add some supporting details. I want to use this lantern as a crown. With the layer targeted, I'll choose Remove Background and then zoom in. I'll use the Selection Brush tool to select the bottom area of the lantern that I want to hide, and then draw another rough selection here at the top. Using the paint bucket, I'll fill that area in with black and then deselect. Then I needed to draw a path with the pen tool around these small holes, and I've saved that path to save time. So in the Paths panel, I'll select the path and then click the Convert to Selection icon so that we have a selection, and then fill that with black and deselect it. Then let's tap the V key to select the Move tool and reposition the crown better on the dog's head. We can also use the arrow keys to just nudge it into place. Then I'll use the selection brush again to select the border between the head and the crown, and choose Generative Fill, and select a model. I'll go ahead and click Generate so that Photoshop can unify the two elements. All right, let's look at the three variations that Photoshop created. And I think I like this one the best. Now, let's change the buttons. I'll target the figure layer, select the Remove tool, and I'm going to disable Remove after each stroke and enable Create New Layer in the options bar. Then I'll paint over the first button, the second, and then the third. And when I click the check mark, Photoshop removes the elements and puts the retouched area on a new layer. One advantage of using the Remove tool is that it doesn't use generative credits like Generative Fill and Expand do. I'll tap M to select the Marquee tool and make a selection where I want to place the new buttons. Then I'll choose Generative Fill, and this time I'll paste in the prompt 3 golden buttons shaped like dog bones for a suit worthy of royalty. And I'll choose Gemini 3 with Nano Banana Pro as the model. I'll click Generate, and I like these buttons, but it wasn't really able to match the color of the suit. So I'll select the Object Selection tool, and with it set to rectangle, I'll drag over the first button. Then, holding down the Shift key to add to my selection, I'll drag over the second button to add it, and do the same with the third button. On the Layers panel, I'll make sure that the mask is targeted, and then use the contextual taskbar to invert the selection, and then fill that area with black and deselect. I'm going to tap V just to select the Move tool in order to hide the pink overlay. Now we need to add a drop shadow. I'll target the layer in the Layers panel, not the mask, and choose the Effects icon and choose Drop Shadow. I'll make sure that the opacity is set high, and then drag in the image area to make sure that the angle matches the jacket. Then I'll adjust the distance as well as the size and apply it. The nice thing about removing the background and adding our own shadows is we can tap the V key to select the Move tool and then reposition the buttons as needed. All right, let's zoom out. The water needs a little something to balance the composition. I'll use the selection brush again to select this area of the water where I want to place some lanterns. I'll choose Generative Fill and paste in the prompt, place 3 golden illuminated flower lanterns floating in the water. I'll choose the model that I want and click Generate. Now if the results aren't what we expected, we can always generate again, but I like this. Now let's unify the color and structure of the image and add some final touches. I'll use this photograph of some paper to help even out the different amounts of noise and grain in the images because they were taken at different times under different lighting conditions. By setting it to soft light, it will help the grain in the individual elements appear to be more consistent. If that's too much, we can always change the opacity, but for now I'll leave it at 100%. I'm going to use this photograph of a backdrop to help unify the color throughout the image. By changing the blend mode to color, we lose the luminance of the layer and we can see through to the layers below. Now I noticed that the texture that we added reduced the visibility of some of the steam from the layers below. So I'll add another layer of paper to help bring back that misty feel. Again, I'll change the blend mode to soft light, but this time I'm going to decrease the opacity. Now to create a vignette that will darken down the edges and keep the viewer's eye in the center of the photograph, I'll add a curves adjustment layer from the bottom of the Layers panel. I'll drag the curve down, but I need to hide the adjustment from the center of the image. So I'll select the Gradient tool, and this time choose the Radial option. I'll drag from the center of the image towards the edge and even beyond, but the gradient is doing the opposite of what I want. It's showing the adjustment in the center and hiding it around the edges. So on the Properties panel, I'll choose Reverse. We can also change the midpoint of the gradient by dragging the square on-screen control. Finally, to bring back some of the warmer colors in the image and make some of the objects pop, I'll hold the Command key on Mac or Control on Windows and click on the thumbnail for the mask on the crown layer to load the mask as a selection. Then I'll target the mask on the Color Backdrop layer, and on the contextual taskbar, use the paint bucket to fill it with black, hiding the color overlay layer in that area. I'll do the same with the button layer, Command or Control clicking on the button layer's layer mask, and then filling the Color Backdrops mask with black. Then I'll deselect that and tap B to switch to the paintbrush. And making sure that I'm painting with black, I can paint in the dog's eyes to hide the color overlay layer, and paint over each of the 3 golden lanterns that are sitting in the water. I'm also going to reduce the overall opacity of the color backdrop layer just a little bit. Now before we wrap up, I'll just return to the wings layer and decrease the opacity a bit. They're just a little too bright and commanding too much attention in the image. Excellent. I'm Julieanne Cost. Thanks for watching.